ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Urban Connection TV. Today we have a special guest in the studio, Dr. Solomon Kofi Amoah. He is a senior lecturer in the Department of Sociology at the University of Ghana, Legon, and he is also a guest researcher at the University of Vienna. He teaches and supervises students at both the undergraduate and the postgraduate levels. Dr. Amoah holds a master's in sociology from the University of Ghana, as well as a PhD in sociology from the University of Cape Coast. His research mainly focuses on the social circumstances of work, how organizational structures inform people's experience, identities, and behaviors, and the nature of work and employment. He also studies technological change and other transformations in organizations, as well as the responses of labor unions, civil society, the state, and organizations to these changes. He is particularly interested, among others, in studying new forms of work organization and how gender and other demographic factors intersect to shape occupations and work locations. Dr. Amoah is a guest researcher and a Banga Africa, which means building a new generation of African academics in Africa. He's a senior fellow at the University of Vienna Department of African Studies here in Vienna. My name is Mr. Moges Teshome, and I am a PhD candidate at the University of Vienna, the Department of African Studies. I'm here with my colleague, Dr. Aalexander, who is a linguist by training and currently a postdoctoral fellow and lecturer in the Department of African Studies at the University of Vienna. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to warmly welcome our guest, Dr. Solomon Kofi Amoah. Dr. Amoah, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, gentlemen, for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Dr. Amoah, could you briefly tell us what brought you here to Austria and what have you been engaged in so far during your stay?
I'm happy to be here this afternoon. I came to the University of Vienna as an Erasmus scholar on the Erasmus exchange program for teaching. So, and also on the Banga Africa's fellowship to the African Studies Department. So I've been engaged in some teaching for a few days, engaging in the students of the department, participating in a couple of courses, working with Professor Adams Bodomo, and also carrying out my research. In terms of the fellowship, my focus has been three-pronged. One, to finish up, write-up of some publications, and also interact with colleagues in the department and the university-wide, and try to build some possible research collaborations going forward with my university and the University of Vienna.
How do you see the academic structure and the teaching experience when you compare the one you experienced at the University of Vienna and, of course, the one you got used to back at the University of Ghana?
It's been a beautiful experience. I think there are quite a few differences compared to the University of Ghana. The first one that jumps at you, of course, is the numbers. Mm-hmm. Very manageable numbers here. I mean, sizable classes, and compared to what we are used to, I mean, very large classes. Even when our European colleagues come to our classes, you could see that we have about 300 and more. So in terms of teaching, the structure is also, I see a lot of similarities. I mean, we do virtually similar things, except for, I think, the student involvement, participation is quite on the high, compared to what we are used to, and it makes teaching very interesting.
Yeah, thank you again, Dr. Amoah, for being with us. In the introduction by my colleague, he mentioned some interesting topic which has to do with the changing dynamics of work in the 21st century. Can you explain what that means? And what are the major drivers behind such a change?
In fact, a lot is changing, not just in our context, but even from my observations here in Europe, a lot is changing in the context of work. I mean, the narrative machines are taking over our work, dates back to the 18th century. Even Karl Marx, thought that machinery is, if you like, the greatest competitor to human labor and all of that, and was of the view that it is going to be a tool that will be used to suppress strikes, for example. The key driver has been technology of the change we are seeing. And beyond that, we also have a profit interest, profit maximization of corporate actors, which is making them pursue new ways of delivering what they've been delivering at the same cost or even less. So all of these have culminated to change the dynamics of work. Now there's gig work all over, and labor has become very fluid. That includes all those activities that do not come under particular employment arrangement. We used to have this Japanese style of the loyal employee, to the extent that one could work, the parents could work for the same company and even keep replacing. Now work is not like that. There's a lot of freelancing, there's a lot of platform work, and that is creating so much change in the world of work. So work is changing, and even with that is how we are trying so much to transform so many things. I observed something very interesting in a supermarket here, and I see the same arguments that came when people were trying to fight ATMs and money counting machines several years ago, emerging again, where now you enter into the supermarket, you pick your scanner, and you scan the price by yourself and pay. No interaction with any teller. You pay, you scan your ticket and get out. Very interesting stuff. So where are the tellers? Their jobs are probably gone. But technology is also creating more work. So it's a whole lot of discussion we can have around work and how it's transforming.
So why do you think this issue is important in our discourse?
I would take it from my perspective. I study human social behavior, and it becomes of keen interest to us because all these changes mean different things for different people. The entrepreneur, we are even having, particularly in the African context, the level of increase in platform work is affecting so many things because people are working, but the governments are having problems how to raise revenue because they have no idea. It's like technology has gone ahead of the political system, and raising revenue from these platforms because they work virtual, and the systems to manage them are not there. So there are so many legs of significance, economic and social, how this thing works and all of that, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Maybe on that point, the advent of social media or digital technology,
yeah.
Because if we may say, and the other aspect is, which is of course one of your area of research, is gender. So the gender relation, yeah. Which has been I would say, changing over the years, as well as the digital revolution might have contributed to these dynamics. What is your take on that?
I agree with you. The digital space is creating so much, on the gender side, in contexts like Ghana, we have more females than males, and yet the opportunities are not the same. So much is changing, and I think the better we study these things, the earlier we understand these dynamics and be able to prefer some solutions, or if you like, recommend ways of handling them properly, the better for all of us in terms of economic and social development.
You alluded to the fact that informal market has been expanding in Africa as well, in general, as well as in Ghana, to the extent that it takes the lion's share of the GDP in most of African countries, and presumably in Ghana. And at the same time, there is a glaring misconception about the nature of formal versus informal economy. In what ways are formal and informal economy related these days? Do you agree that this dichotomy between formal and informal economy holds water?
It's true. The informal economy is looming large, particularly in our context. A World Bank report in 2019 actually asserts that about 90% of workforces in a lot of emerging economies remain informal. And that is reasonably the case. And the labor force is largely informal in many places. You can talk about Peru, where we have about 75% of the working population informal. You talk about the Sub-Saharan Africa, which is about 75% informal. And even the 75% I'm talking about, it's even larger if you take out South Africa. Because South Africa has about 60-point-something% formal, sector workers. In Ghana, we have less than 23%, formal. The rest are within the informal and largely private, areas. So you can imagine a population such huge, and when you conceptualize that this economy is subservient, or if you like, second to a certain formal economy, then it becomes very difficult to understand how to even manage your economy. So for me, the way the formal and informal economy is related is quite intricate. It's not dichotomous, as many suggest. In my research, I come across individuals, units, and activities that straddle between formal and informal spaces. So you have a so-called formal organization, registered and well-regulated, with informal workers within them. And you have employees of formal organizations rendering services to private own-account workers. And so people move in and out of these so-called two sectors. They are never, they could never appropriately be described as dichotomous. For me, if I should follow Mata Chen's postulation, I would say that the economy appears on a continuum, where we have the formal at one end of the continuum and the informal at another end of the continuum. At any point in time, units and individuals could move towards this end or that end. They flow together. And that way, I believe, would then help us to be able to think about the whole economy holistically and be able to regulate the space if regulation is what we need. Yeah.
So given the increasingly expanding nature of the informal sector versus the formal sector, it seems like we need some policy interventions So, based on your expertise, what specific issues are pointed out and what form of interventions are needed or can be identified for this situation, particularly through research?
There is a need for more research, in this space. I wouldn't take just my research and a few that I've come across as a finality. There is need to really study and appreciate this space and the relationship between the formal and informal sector, which I think is what is needed. The informal economy is growing, and it's been growing since the 1970s. I mean, since Hart's work, and we started characterizing it as such. The initial thought was that as the formal economy grows, the informal economy is going to be consumed. But rather, it's been the other way around. The formality is reducing, or the formal economy is reducing, and the informal economy is growing larger and larger. There's a need to study and understand the operations of this economy and be able to come up with ways of regulating the space so that the work people do within this space is also decent. Because when you enter what we call formal industries or enterprises, they are fairly well regulated. People are paid fair salaries, and it may not be the best, but at least they have a pension, and labor laws are respected to some extent. But because of this characterization, we've left this huge economy of about 70% and more of our working force unregulated because we consider them informal. Meanwhile, you check the GDP, they bring the most, if you like, to the space. We can talk about the farms, we can talk about the many things, own account workers, the many activities that go on there. It's huge. And there is a need for regulation, but we can't just sit somewhere and be able to regulate it until we have understood this space, actually ensure that our labor regulations are working, even in that space. And that will also require, especially if I refer to the case of Ghana, that will require that we revise, or if you like, we review our labor laws. Because as it stands now, I think the thought of the framers of the law was largely for the formal sector. And so a lot of situations in the workplace do not find themselves in there. So one key step is to enforce our labor regulations, and if possible, review the laws to accommodate the informal sector. So there is a need for social assistance. There is a need to ensure that social insurance is working so that people can fall back to something. There is a need for safety nets. For workers, for me, I look at the working populace in this space. And when these things are taken care of through regulation and all of that, then the government can also rake in a lot of income through taxation from this sector. Because as it stands now, we don't get so much in terms of taxation from that sector because we don't know who is operating there. So we can have a proper tax base to implement the social assistance I'm talking about, so that we can be able to invest in our education, we can be able to invest in the health of our people and have a better society.
As you said, that regulation is one of the intervention.
Yeah.
But at the same time, implementation is a whole different issue. So if I follow your conceptualization where we put the formal and informal dynamics on the same continuum, it necessarily means that there are a lot of shade of grays in between, right? So how could government of Ghana, in this transitional period, until such a time that there will be regulations, there will be implementation, how could they enforce the existing mechanisms to deal with this shade of grays?
If I understand you well, I think even the space we have now, I mean, we can use decentralized governance system, use our assemblies to at least register our spaces and activities and be able to understand what goes on in there. So, and beyond that, even when people are streaming into formal and informal and all of that, it is for the government or the state to have an eye on what contracts are these organizations having with our people. Are they fair? If they aren't, we should be able to insist on the right thing being done. For example, I can give you an example where in my studies I come across companies that have employment. I don't know whether I should call it employment, but contracts with people who have been on this arrangement for like 15 years. Every 6 months, your contract is terminated. Every 6 months, your contract is terminated. So it's a cycle. Every 6 months it's terminated, and some of the people don't even know that this is a termination. They say they give you a compulsory leave every 6 months. But my research reveals that after every 6 months, when they go on that 15-day or 1-month leave, the contract is terminated and they come back because the existing labor law frowns on having someone for a long period without regularizing their employment. So companies are strategizing to avoid that. So after every 6 months, your appointment is terminated and a new one begins. So in essence, they are breaking the law and yet not breaking the law. But that could only happen if someone who is supposed to keep the taps on or who is supposed to watch them. There's a labor ministry and all of that. What are they doing? Are they not aware? Maybe they are not aware. So we can study, even get closer through the assemblies and try to understand what is happening in the workspace and be able to have a hand. Even what we have can still give us something if we are going to implement them. And that way, we can understand the spaces that are working and be able to, come up with workable means in the meantime, how to regulate them and also to raise more income from the much more informal spaces. Yeah, that's what I think.
Let's zoom out now on at the regional level. And speaking of integration, right? Integrating the formal and informal economy is necessary, but at the same time, there has been much discussion about African Continental Free Trade Area, the so-called AFTA, over the last few years now. What is your view on that? And can it bring about regional integration? And in what way probably it affects the work environment in the organization?
Discussing regional integration is quite an interesting area, but it's what we need. And I think in 2012 or so, the 18th ordinary session of the African Union came up with the AFTA, Africa Continental Free Trade Area. And as we speak now, I think 46 or so out of 54 countries have ratified the agreement. It's been more than a decade since 2012. Not so much has happened. But this is something that Africa needs. Because if you look at the projections, AFTA is going to open up and reach about 1.3 billion, people in Africa. That's a huge market. And it is projected that about several trillion, 3.4 trillion US dollars, that is up for grabs if AFTA is implemented appropriately. So I think that if it is done properly, we are going to have a well-integrated region, and a lot of the issues within the economic space will also have been resolved. But the question that jumps at me is, how prepared are we? Mm-hmm. Because the reason why I'm thinking AfTA is the way to go is because most of the economic transactions among African countries, can you imagine that ships that are transporting goods from Ghana to other African countries go through other European waters? Because the infrastructure is not there. We haven't linked these things. So there's a huge economic potential for our continent if we are going to work properly on this AfTA. It's huge. I mean, you think about it, there's a huge market. We could trade amongst ourselves, 1.3 billion population. That's a huge market waiting. And I don't know if we are ready, but that is what we need. And we can actually pull so many people. In fact, the projection of AfTA Secretariat itself shows that if it is implemented, about 30 million people will be pulled out of extreme poverty if it is well implemented. So it's a good thing, and I hope we are able to pull it off.
I just wanted to know if there are some particular conditions that need to be fulfilled in order to ensure that this integration is done within the regional level.
Yeah, I think so. One of them will be to accelerate the process of regional common currency. There is a need for regional common currencies, and that is one condition precedent for this AfTA working. Otherwise, it's not going to work. We need to do that and do that well. There is also the need to train our tertiary students in practical skills, because what we are producing need to be practicalized. I mean, what we are producing need to be refined or even transformed or processed.
Or even there is a saying, sorry, there is the famous saying that I think by the Nigerian parliamentarian who said, we have to produce what we consume and we have to consume what we produce.
Exactly. And one thing we need to add to that is that, you know, a lot of the goods we produce are similar. So we have to be careful. We need to move to processing and improving on our products. Otherwise, I mean, you produce cocoa, Côte d'Ivoire produces cocoa, you can't engage in any proper exchange. So these things are important. We need to work on improving these things. Information sharing on governance and security is also another important thing that will help AfTA to work. And we need to harmonize, if you like, border control measures. If we cannot abolish them, my recommendation would be to abolish them. If we cannot abolish them, we need to harmonize them. Otherwise, there is no need, it's not going to be possible to have this AfTA agreement work properly. The other thing is to ratify the freedom of movement, you know, protocol. I mean, I came to the Schengen area. You could move from one country to another. It's easy to stay in Slovakia and work in Vienna. I mean, if we do this in our space, I mean, it will help because there are no borders. There are no borders virtually. So these are some of the things we need to do, and strengthen cybersecurity, because that is where we are in the moment. We cannot continue to do business as usual. People will need to transact online. They will need to make payments online. And they are trying to work on an African payment platform. It's good, but we need to improve cybersecurity. Otherwise, people will not have trust in the system. So these are some of the things we need to do. And I need to add that we need to promote the work of women, because they are a huge population that we cannot leave behind. We need to intentionally promote the work of women if AFTA is going to work properly, and also work on our diasporan relations. One, for skills transfer and for technology transfer. These are things I think are conditions precedent for the success of AFTA. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Dr. Amoah, for your insightful remarks there. So, ladies and gentlemen, this brings us towards the end of our discussion. But before we close our interview today, Dr. Solomon Amoah, are there any final thoughts you would like to share with us that we haven't been able to ask, or any final thoughts or message?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think as we started, you asked me my mission in Vienna, and I think that would be something I would want to say finally. I mean, we need to give attention to North-South cooperations in education. And exchanges like what brought me to Vienna are very important. We often receive people from Europe and other places in our classrooms in Ghana and other places. These are experiences that are good for our students and also good for our faculty. And we need to develop it and be able to foster cross-cultural understanding and collaboration through programs like the Erasmus exchange programs, many of them. These networks could be built for potential North-South collaboration in research. And I really hope that some of these collaborations could be maintained and even built even more deeper for proper international. So there are a few people I would want to thank. First, the University of Vienna and the Erasmus program. I also want to thank the Carnegie Corporation of New York and University of Ghana for offering me this fellowship on the Banga Africa project. And also, sincerely, I want to thank Professor Adams Bodomo for hosting me. He's been a great guide so far, and the Department of African Studies and all the faculty and colleagues there have been very, very helpful. I also want to especially thank Mrs. Mary Bodomo for, hosting me in Vienna so amazingly. I'm very grateful to all of you.
So, Dr. Solomon Amoah, I, together with my colleagues and the entire crew of the Urban Connection TV, would like to thank you very much for being with us at the Urban Connection TV today. It was an absolute pleasure talking to you. We wish you all the best with the rest of your time in Austria, as well as in your future endeavor. And I hope you have enjoyed your time in Austria, Vienna. And we hope to see you soon. Thank you so much, and goodbye.
Yeah, thank you.